Hi, my name is Jameson Stevie. I'm the Executive Director of the Martin Prosperity Institute here at Rotman. I'd like to welcome you to our event tonight. Welcome to our beautiful event space here at the Rotman School. This is the second in a series that we're putting on called The Shift Disturbers. Youth and the Public Good, our subtle title, and Apathetic My Ass, the not-so-subtle title. There's a myth, and the myth would be when you talk to people over 50 that the next generation is entitled, and all they do is play on the internet, and they have high expectations and low work ethic. And then there's the legend that comes from people under 40, and I have chosen 40 only because I turned 40 in October and I need to redefine youth. That's a whole other separate session that we can have at a different time. The legend there is that this is a group of people who is highly, highly engaged in a building of the public good, but just in a different way from how their parents created that public good. As I said, our structure tonight is pretty strict. What we've asked folks is to follow an almost TED Talks format. Each speaker will be given 7 minutes to speak. And then Elamin will conduct a moderated Q&A till about 6:35, and then we'll leave about 10 minutes for audience questions if we are allowed to get to that point. We'll see how everyone does on their timing. And with that, we'll turn it over to our first speaker, who I believe is Alison.
So I have been given the somewhat enviable or unenviable task of telling you the data on how Canadians generally and young people specifically are engaging in civic and democratic life. So every couple of years, The Economist puts out a global democracy index. They measure the health of about just under 200 countries across the world. Where do you think Canada ranks on that? 100 is wrong. Any guesses? 17, closer. We're 8th, so pretty good. Transparency International, they do a similar survey on global corruption perceptions. Where do you think we rank there? You're eating into my minutes. 3, okay. A little closer, we're 10th. So you get the picture. We're pretty high up when you look internationally. But then, of course, the question becomes how we square that with the growing sense that many people in Canada have that our civic and democratic life isn't working quite as well as it could. Because I've been tasked with sharing the numbers, I'll share one stark number, and probably this is the bluntest assessment of civic and democratic engagement, which is voter turnout in the 2011 election, 61%. If you do the same for young people, you get a much lower number, 39%. Now, that isn't that historically odd. Young people have always voted in smaller numbers than adults, but what has been changing, and the biggest reason why voter turnout in Canada has gone down so steadily over 40 or so years, is because young people are increasingly less likely to ever start voting. So that is part of the thorny problem that led me to start Samara, the organization Jameson mentioned at the beginning. We are interested in that connection or lack of it between citizens and their democratic and their civic life. We are interested in politics in particular because although all forms of engagement are important, it often is through politics that we determine how societies will be created, we allocate lots of money, and we make laws. While I believe that people, as we know, are apathetic about politics, I've never met anybody who is apathetic about the issues facing them in their communities. And it's about that disconnect that we are interested. We started our organization by getting some advice from people who are at the front lines of that relationship between citizens and their democracy, our members of parliament. So a lot of the work that we do is really based on the advice we got from them. The folks at Rotman kindly handed out a little bookmark for a book that we have coming out in April that shares the advice of these MPs, and what they really say is quite surprising and shocking about how important it is that we start to repair this disconnect. Now, of course, running for office is a very extreme form of civic engagement, and there are lots of other forms of civic engagement that are equally important. So some of the work we've done recently tries to look at ways that Canadians can participate in politics and civic life in between elections. When we look at simply voter turnout, we are missing about 1,200 days in between elections where there's lots of things we can do. And so there are 5 areas that I just wanted to touch on quickly to give you a bit of the lay of the land as to what people are doing. The first, the Twittering class, as we call it, is what people are doing online. The second is offline, having conversations and talking, a bit like we are today. Thirdly, activism, protesting, taking it to the streets. The fourth is civic engagement, joining groups, volunteering, that sort of thing. And then the last one is formal political participation, getting involved in campaigns, parties, and the like. I won't steal the thunder, but I could imagine if I asked you which one is the lowest form, you would probably guess. So I'll just walk you through the numbers really quickly because I know I don't have a ton of time. So these numbers, the first set I'll show you is the percentage of Canadians overall who admit to doing this activity at least once in the last year. So first we've got online discussion. First one is sort of engaging on social media, 17%. Now we'll look at youth, 30%. You'll see a trend that will continue. Using email or instant messaging to talk about issues in their community, 30% for the average Canadian, 42% for youth. Blogging, 15% versus 26% for youth. And participating in an online group of some kind, 25 versus 40% for youth. So, apathetic my ass, right, Jameson? Second area, offline discussion. Only 40% of Canadians say they had a conversation about a social or political issue in the last year. I thought that was really low. 51% of youth, and youth we defined as 18 to 35. Again, almost across the board, you see youth coming in higher than the average Canadian, even in offline discussions, including things like organizing events, making speeches, and the like. When it comes to activism, Canadians are like they're protesting and boycotting much more than they do other things. As you'll see, about 50% of Canadians signed a petition or boycotted a product, about the same for youth. Protesting, 14% versus 21% for youth. Civic engagement, which I often see as sort of the front door for many people and how they participate and get involved in things that matter to them. Here, again, there's a little bit more similarity between average and young people. Working with others in an issue, about 30% on both. Active in a group, almost identical, 58% of Canadians say that they did that, and young people as well. Donated to a cause, again, young people are doing this in higher amounts than older people, and volunteering about the same, a little higher for youth. So you can see those numbers there. And here we have the bottom of the barrel category, formal political engagement. So this is things like contacting an elected official, attending a meeting, donating to a campaign, volunteering in an election, and being a member of a political party. This is the only area where young people are participating in smaller numbers than the average Canadian. And in fact, they're 2 to about 50% less likely to do those activities depending on what it is. So a really stark message here, I think, for anybody who is concerned about the quality of our democracy and is wondering about, and when I mentioned to you about voter turnout and why it's going down, this is another, I would say, canary in the coal mine when you look at the difference between young people and middle-aged or average-age Canadians. So a few quick points to wrap up. Overall, while there's lots of ways you can participate, it's notable that on average, Canadians are more likely to vote than do any of the other things. So it's not like we have the most vibrant civic society across the board. On average, Canadians do 5 of these 20 activities. Youth do 6 out of 10. And people who are involved in politics do half, 10 out of 20. So as much as we may disparage our kind of political class, they are doing the democratic heavy lifting. Young people are largely bringing up the average, as I showed you, except for informal politics and voting. And I'm sure we'll talk about this. There's lots of reasons for it. Some of them are socioeconomic and correlated to people's education. Some of them, I think, are structural. And in fact, the fact that the system does sometimes intentionally, maybe meaning to or not, exclude people. There's a whole bunch of different reasons. But a big one that we hear in the work we do is how few people, A, know how to get involved, and B, say they have a role model that can show them the way. So this is just a snapshot of some of the people that, and Dave will know about this project, that we identified as part of our Everyday Political Citizen project, people who are making a difference in their communities. You'll see they look as beautiful and diverse as the city and the country that we live in. These are not the people we often talk about, but there's some wonderful ones. The very bottom above the number was chosen by a panel including Rick Mercer, elected through Dave's Dave's ranked ballot, as the top Canadian political citizen of the year, a volunteer in Nova Scotia who's doing terrific work there on re-engaging their democracy. So I thought I would just end there, and sorry for all that data, but I hope I did well by you, and that's all. Thank you.
Hey everyone, how's it going? How's it going? All right.
They're overwhelmed by the math.
So I don't have any PowerPoint slides because I had a busy week, and sometimes it's fun to talk without slides. So I had a really crazy day because I've been working on a voting reform project, which I actually want to talk about at the end of my 7 minutes, because I think the way that we elect people not only affects the mathematics of who wins, but it affects who runs and how they run, and the degree to which people feel included, invited, or alienated from a political process. But the reason I mention it right now is because we've been working on this campaign for 4 years for ranked ballots in Toronto, and there's actually a private member's bill coming to Queen's Park tomorrow. So I've been doing media interviews all day, and I didn't have time to prepare a formal kind of presentation for my 7 minutes. And I was in the shower about an hour ago being worried and stressed out. I'm going to be blustery, and my mind will be cluttered, and it won't be a nice linear presentation as I'd like. And then I thought, you know what, screw that. I think one of the things that really pushes youth away from politics is that we're often too scripted. And everything is now teleprompted, and everything has to be perfect and shiny, and especially politicians are so risk-averse of saying anything unscripted because the media will attack them. And I think we need to sometimes just get in front of a microphone and talk and have a few notes scribbled on a piece of paper and hope that it goes well because it comes across as more authentic. So let's see how the next 6 minutes go. I hope I don't screw up too much, but I'm excited that I'm not as scripted as I usually might be. I also wanted more time to pull out some nicer clothes. We usually, I do a lot of public speaking, and I try and at least do what you're doing. You're not wearing a tie, but you're like, you've got a collar, and it's respectable. And I had the same epiphany. I was like, screw that, If it's not something that I would wear at home on a Saturday, why would I wear it on a stage when we're just talking about how to make society better? I'm not applying for a job. I'm not running for office. Why are we always making things so goddamn fancy? Okay? So here I am in my hoodie without scripted notes talking about how we can engage more youth. And I think what I've said so far is probably one of the biggest things we can actually do. Make it more real, make it more authentic. And dare I say, I'm already running out of time. I haven't even started talking about my scribbled notes. I think one of the reasons that someone like Rob Ford appeals to tens of thousands of people without opening up a whole can of worms is that he is so authentic. He's not teleprompted. He does have a message that he sticks on, but he goes off on tangents, and you can tell that he's just kind of talking and saying whatever's on his mind. And half the time it gets him in trouble, but half the time people are like, that guy's kind of like, he's kind of stumbling and mumbling, and I can relate to that because that's what we all do. We all kind of stumble and mumble. And I'm going to mumble for 3-4 more minutes. I want to propose the idea that the notion of apathy, the word itself, is an act of blaming the victim. So if I was to walk around this room and beat all of you over the head with a bat until you're all lying on the floor, and then I stood here and said, what are y'all doing on the floor? That would be kind of weird and rude and inappropriate. And I think that's what we do when we say, why aren't youth involved? Or why isn't anyone involved? We make it so difficult as a society to participate. We make such little effort to encourage people to participate. And in many ways, we actually make it extremely difficult and put obstacles in people's way. And then we get together and wonder why people aren't engaging. So let me just give you a few examples. Well, here's a very simple one and very something we could easily fix. We don't teach civics. We do a half credit in grade 10. A half credit. American history gets a full course. That's a different country. Canadian civics gets a half credit where we allegedly cover municipal, provincial, and federal politics all at once, which is impossible. You could do an entire credit on each of those, and you would just be scratching the surface. You could do an entire mandatory course on the third sector, how nonprofits work, how charities work. Do you know how many few Canadians, how many few nonprofit and charitable board members could tell you the difference between a nonprofit and a charity? These are the basic building blocks of a democratic society that explain to people how they can participate. And I like to use when you buy something at IKEA or if you buy Lego, you get a little instruction manual, and you need it to build the things in the box. And trying to build a piece of IKEA, forget the Lego things. There's a movie out there saying, don't use the manual. But trying to build a piece of IKEA furniture without the manual would be impossible. It's actually hard to build it with the manual. And I think if we're not teaching civics, I think people look at the political system as a pile of IKEA pieces without a map. And they're like, you know what, I'm just going to stay away from that because there's all these different levels, and I'm just not sure that I might even embarrass myself if I try and participate. And it's safer not to participate at all. Here's a fun one too. What do most people think of? What do you think of when I say the word principal's office? Danger. What else? What does it mean if you're in the principal's office? You're in trouble, right? If you go home and tell your mom I was in the principal's office, she probably won't be very happy with you. Let's think about that for a second. What kind of message does that teach youth from the youngest age? This is their first interaction and introduction to authority outside of the context of their home. And this isn't introduced to you as like, here's your principal. This is the guy you go to if you have an idea of how to make the school better. This is the person who can listen to your ideas that only you have through the lens and eyes and experience of a student of how to make your experience better. This is the person who can make it happen. You have an idea, you go to him. Right? No. If you meet the principal, it's because you've done something wrong. And until we can live in a society where people can go home and say, guess what, Mom? I was at the principal's office. And the parent responds with pride because it means that student was identified by a teacher as someone who has something to contribute to the democratic process of the school. I think we are screwed. We are screwed as long as we live in this culture that from the youngest age we teach that authority is something to avoid. I've got 40 seconds left and a whole bunch of things I want to say. I should have written a speech and then it would have been more concise. Along the lines of formality, I talked about our attire, but we do so much more that I think really freak people out. I was in Queen's Park recently and the pages, the kids in the suits, they walk around and when they turn, they have to make these really careful 90-degree, they're like soldiers marching through Queen's Park. Who does that? It's like, what is that for? And what is that? Russell Brand was talking about, not voting. He did an interview a few months ago and talking about apathy. And he had this great line about how our houses of government are so formal that they're designed in a way that those who come from an elite background will say, what was this line? This is how it should be. But anyone else would be like, this is weird, right? The way that we decorate things and the language we use in our attire, I think affects people's feelings of inclusion. Okay, I'm out of time. Let's do one or two really quick things. Partisanship. This one's kind of ironic because the bickering we have at City Hall and at Queen's Park, I think pushes people away. And the irony here is we're talking about how to get youth involved, but what we really need to get more people engaged is actually to get our politicians to grow up a little bit. The people who are acting most infantile is not our apathetic youth, it's our politicians at all three levels of government. It's disgusting and it pushes any intelligent person away from politics. So I'll just wrap all that up. I had some other comments, but I'll throw them into the Q&A. I think if we can make politics more recognizable to youth, more relevant, more inviting, more mature, ironically, and more authentic, they would step up to the plate in a second. Thank you.
So maybe it's because I have a newly minted 6-year-old who's waiting for me in a diner with a giant milkshake and a bag of fries there, but I'm going to focus a little bit on the generational side of things, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in a civic footprint from that perspective. I'm going to start with the boomers, and they are the two that are circled in the bottom in the white circle. Let's call them Sally and Johnny, and there's Daddy with a cigar in the top there. Sally and Johnny were born at the most prosperous, fabulous time anyone could really have been born. Their parents, Dad with a cigar there, had worried about stuff like the Depression and stuff like war, and coming out of that had some shared values of social responsibility and mutual sacrifice that Sally and Johnny's parents were kind of saddled with. Sally and Johnny, in the cowboy suit, not so much. In fact, that cowboy suit brought in about $75 million a year. That's how prosperous the baby boomer generation was, that they could decorate their kids, and the boomers, the product of the generation that worked so hard to build some of those civic institutions, the right of freedom for some of those civic institutions, could finally be spoiled. And child rearing could become, in effect, a hobby. So what's it like to grow up if child rearing is a hobby? And you are in a time where infrastructure, including the roads that we still drive on today, by the way, and the hospitals and schools that we still go in today, because that's the era in which they were built. There hasn't been as much built on the infrastructure side since then. So what's that like, and what does that do to your civic footprint? Well, the yellow brick road that Dad with a cigar helped to build, along with some of those traditional civic institutions, maybe you're going to start to veer off that. Why? Because you were the chosen generation. Time magazine tells you so. In 1967, you know who the man of the year was? It wasn't. It was an entire generation of baby boomers. That's how influential this group was. When the population has been in decline for 200 years and then you show up as this giant blip on the demographic roadmap, you get to change some of the systems. And do the baby boomers start to change some of the systems in the traditional sense that Alison was taking us through a little bit? And or are they bringing different values and topics to the traditional fray? And I would suggest largely the latter. You know, the role of advertising is huge. You got to remember, in 1950, about 10% of households had televisions. 10 years later, 90% of households had televisions. So this is a generation that's grown up with more instant information, and we're starting to see what that looks like in their social movements, because the exploration of diversity, of topics, of people, of change is moving its way into their life in a way that mom and dad down there on the bottom, dad with a cigar, doesn't necessarily have from the world that they were coming from. Life is something to be played with when you're a boomer. The workday, I'm going to work. I'm going to get the corner office. Women are joining the workforce for the first time in big numbers. Different social issues are joining the fray. And this is an exciting time for some social justice, some workaholic stuff happening in the background, but an interesting time when some of I would wonder, to Dave's point, how many people from this generation demanded to get into the principal's office because of their right to be there. So most of the folks in this room tonight might represent these next two generations that came. You know, Gen X, I'm firmly in that group, and this is a smaller group. This was some of the group that you may remember came from the latchkey. The divorce rates of the boomers were higher too. Why? Because why do I need to stay married? I'm going to change the rules and I'm going to divorce and find a different love. And the kids of some of the boomers were growing up in the change, in the wake of that kind of change, and that's going to have an impact on your civic footprint for sure. Less politically active? Absolutely. You're a smaller group. You're trying to walk in the shadow of the boomers, with all the protests and all the movements and the talk about the Beatles so it's a harder group to follow in the shadow of as it relates to civic activity. And then fast forward, of course, to the next group, the Gen Next, or millennials as they're sometimes called. Talk about a generation of change. These guys don't know anything else. That's just the oxygen in which they're born. And the notion of being a culture back in relative stability, but resilience, and the role of parenting and how that fabric makes its way into your civic footprint. Gen X, you rode your bike outside till the streetlights came on. And then you came home and you ate supper and you went to bed. Gen Y, you're not riding your bike outside unless you've got the helmet and the knee pads and your dad is watching. I mean, I'm virgin. We're bad at this. But, you know, Ross will stand on one end of the block and I'll stand on the other and we'll kind of have each other. You know, she's 6 and our next one is 3. But this notion of being helicopter parents to that generation, what does that do to your civic footprint? Because you're being hovered upon, aren't you? Everything that you're doing is being watched and studied and prized and praised. How does that have an impact in the world and how you see it? I think these things all have an impact. So if the boomers grew up in a time of relative prosperity, let's talk a little bit about what those last two groups that I talked about, what the world looks like today. The macroeconomic backdrop is as important as the year you're born. When the boomers grew up, they were told, you just need to get to school, get a good job, life is great. Life is great. You walk on the golden path, the yellow brick road, and you're following your life to great prosperity. That's all you get to do. Well, guess what, guys? A plus B does not equal C anymore as it relates to the life path. How many people do you know in the generation that I just talked about with 1, 2, 3 degrees can't get a job? Working for free as internships. There's a different concept of the macroeconomic activity that's happening right now. You think that doesn't have an impact in your social and your civic footprint? I think it does. McKinsey tells us, this past month they've produced a new study, 230 white-collar jobs. The jobs that the boomers helped to start getting, 230 million of those jobs are going to disappear in the next decade. That represents about $9 trillion worth of work there. And that they're going to be eliminated or transformed because of computers. So wait a minute. Y'all told me I just need to go to school, get a good job, and I'm going to be fine. But wait a minute, the whole nature of work is changing. And what does that have an impact on this generation and how they choose to make a contribution to the civic sphere and the social space that actually produce them? This Pew study came out and it said for the first time, parents today are worried. Only 23% of Canadian parents think that their kids are going to be better off than they were. What? That's not the Canadian model that we're familiar with, and that's not the kind of generational pace of change that we're used to seeing. So what's happening there? Well, young people are saying, okay, I can't necessarily rely on the systems, the yellow brick road, the social systems that followed. I'm going to have to be a little bit entrepreneurial now. I'm going to need to take some of my own passion and own drive and apply that to a new shape and form. There's a study that came out recently from CIBC. It said 46% of kids right now who are in post-secondary school see themselves starting their own business after they graduate. That's incredible. There's a level of entrepreneurship that's happening right now in the macro scene out there that is making its way into I think, the civic realm. And so this notion of needing to keep in mind the backdrop of our socioeconomic and put that over top of what we're evaluating as our civic status, I think is a very important thing. So too is the ability to tap all of these different generations in whatever shape and form they want to make their civic contribution. And this is where civic action plays a role. It doesn't matter if you're used to spending time in a boardroom or a dorm room or a community hall or a church basement. If you've got great ideas on how to make your civic space, on how to tackle some of those problems I just talked about before, youth unemployment, finding ways to bring new diverse voices into the fold, new issues. Civic action has an opportunity, and this is what we do and have done for 10 years, to bring those voices and tap that wisdom of crowds to the new fold. We want to, in fact, leverage the diversity that the generations have and the different ways that they want to apply their skills and insights. And the Emerging Leaders Network is something that we have established within the civic action. There's about 800 rising leaders that belong to this group, and they bring their own ideas of civic activity to the fold. Do we encourage folks to take part in the traditional political process? 100%. Let's be clear. The reason it's the backbone of our democratic society is because it is stable. It is an important component for us to move forward with whatever social issue you want to advance. But the ability to get something closer to action is often what is going to inspire young people to get involved in civic life. Often in a political environment, it just takes so darn long to get something done. And I say that as a very proud former public servant who has watched firsthand how difficult it is sometimes to get an agenda forward. I was on vacation recently and was reading Double Down. It was talking about the last election in the States and how when Obama was in, what sort of the thinking was. And he sort of made an interesting comment in this book. And he said, when you're not elected, you think, my God, it'll be so easy. I'm going to get this great campaign. I'm going to get these great ideas. And I'm going to go in and have some change. He said, if you can positively get 20% done as a governing party, as an elected official, 20% done of what you thought you were going to do, consider yourself lucky. So, is it an important component? The formal political process, it is. Do we complement it with other stuff in the meantime, on the sides? Absolutely, we need to. And this page talks a little bit about some of the projects, including something that Dave was involved in Better Ballots there. The thought I want to leave you with is this. Whatever road leads you to civic participation is a great one. There are multiple ways to get to a different destination. Some might be taking the main road, some might be taking a dirt road, some may be taking a highway, a side street. If we just set up a traffic count on the main road, we'll actually never have a sense on how much activity is truly out there. Thank you.
So good evening, everybody. Thank you very, very much for giving some time here this evening and for being part of this conversation. My part of tonight, and that Jameson helped to frame, was I wanted to share with you a thought that if you have a 14 to 18-year-old young person in your life, I know there's some that are actually here this evening, I want to argue that the world, and especially Canada, is in actually very good hands. The organization I proudly represent, that I started with my brother Craig, Free the Children, works with 14 to 18-year-olds, maybe 12 to 18, but I'm really going to focus on that 14 to 18 category, and we work with them in significant ways. Just to give you a sense, we have 4 million of them on our Facebook page, 2 million Canadian kids engaged, 131 school boards, and 35,000 educators that use our programming to try to bring actually civics alive in the classroom, albeit in informal ways. When we work with kids, we see an incredible level of engagement, and these kids are so passionate, so engaged, and so excited to change the world. Example, this is something called We Scare Hunger, where kids literally go out on Halloween, and instead of trick-or-treating for candy, they trick-or-treat for non-perishable canned goods to give to their local food banks. Last year in Canada alone, these kids raised 1 million pounds of canned goods, the single largest one-day collection for food banks in Canadian history, by kids trick-or-treating. And they go off and they get to understand, and they actually drop off these canned goods at shelters or places that need these canned goods in terms of food banks, and they start to realize, why do we need food banks in the first place? And then they participate in shelters, and this is a really cool one that I just want to echo. This is one that we did with the RBC, where kids actually went, because Canada was, of course, getting rid of the penny last year, and they collected pennies to give to clean water programs, and they filled up their little bags, and there was a little red line, and $25 gave somebody clean water for a year. Canadian kids raised 140 million pennies last year, 140 million pennies, which is the equivalent of 76 fully grown African elephants in weight, or the height equivalent of 137 CN Towers, by kids raising pennies. And the level of engagement just simply continues. So we see all these kids engage, whether it be in local issues, in terms of the First Nations component that we work on, or international issues, and they start to realize they're not alone. But here's the kicker. 17 years ago, when we started Free the Children, the two uncoolest things you could do as a young person was, 1, change the world, and 2, take part in glee clubs. You were socially ostracized. 17 years later, the 2 coolest things you can do as a high school student is, 1, change the world, and 2, take part in glee clubs. It's all come full circle. One of the things that we do, I just want to use this as a case study, is something called We Day. We have 14 of these events a year. We fill 20,000 kids in stadiums all across Canada, 9 in Canada, through the United States. Our first one's in London, England next week, at Wembley, actually. And we bring kids together, and they can learn to realize in a day-long series of social change that changing the world is not only socially acceptable, it's our responsibility, and it's super cool. It is super cool. It is awesome. And we have We Days around the country, and they're staying involved, and they're getting engaged, and they're finding their issues, and you can't buy a ticket, you have to earn your way in through service. You can't buy a ticket, you have to earn your way in through service. And these kids realize that they can make a difference. And then they go off to their schools, and they take part in students' campaigns, and action kits, and lesson plans, online resources, and with our organization, at least, hundreds of full-time support staff, and many other remarkable youth organizations throughout our country that support these initiatives. And whether it's literally 160,000 kids in stadiums to $11 million raised by 1,000 different social causes that these kids have helped to support this year, we're seeing levels of engagement. And they're making their voices amplified, maybe not necessarily only through the ballot process, which we'll talk about in a moment, but very much online. Sometimes we hear these are slacktivists, and they just simply want to do a forward, and they just want to do a tweet, and that's what they're going to do. And you know what? That's okay. I think that's actually okay. If that's how they're going to raise their voice, we shouldn't be diminished. And the conversation we need to have, and the conversation we all need to have, is how can they do even more? How can they turn that tweet or that Facebook post into something substantive? But I'm also going to argue, when you get kids involved at a young age, we're setting them up for success. Some of the other speakers mentioned this as well. We've been doing this for a long time. It's been an amazing up and down journey, and changing the world now, once again, hopefully for many young people, is cool. But we did a longitudinal study with something called Mission Measurement as part of the Kellogg School of Business. It's an independent evaluator, and they saw that kids involved in social issues for more than 4 years through our program, but necessarily just generally more than 4 years, again, that sustained level of engagement, 80% of them continued to volunteer, 83% continued to donate to a charity, and here's the cool thing, 79% of these kids, when they turned 18, voted in the last national election. It can be done. It can be done, but we need to sustain, and we need to engage, and we need to teach civic engagement equally as we teach math and science. And if we don't make that investment, we're going to have disengaged students. If we do make that investment, we're in a good place. My last very quick thing is I just want to mention very, very briefly as I end, is that we started a social enterprise called Me to We a number of years ago to help fund Free the Children, and it's basically using business models to help create civic change. And I'm just going to give you one simple example. And it's hard to have charities be entrepreneurial because of our archaic laws in Canada, but we were able to figure this out with the help from KPMG and Tories and a bunch of other wonderful people that have helped us along the way. But we sell products that, again, support the organization. This is one called a Rafiki Friend Chain. Now, for those of you who don't know Lion King very well, Rafiki means friend. And these things are actually made by the mamas in the communities in which we work, and this is some of our friends from Degrassi wearing them. And they're very simple. They're beaded activities, and basically it's a little bracelet or an anklet or whatever it is. And these are made by, again, the women in the communities in Kenya, in this case, where the actual product is sold and the kids buy them, and for every one purchase creates a social impact, whether it be clean water or healthcare or education. But the reason I share it is this alone. This year alone, 100,000 kids bought a Rafiki friend chain in Canada. 100,000 young people. And the reason I want to mention this is not for any dissimilar reason to say that kids are actually voting every single day. Kids are voting every single day. They may not be voting with their ballot, but they're voting with their wallet. And companies are starting to get this. And groups are starting to get this. Our government may be the last institution to get this, but they're going to understand this very soon. And when the companies start to understand the power of these kids, and the kids start to understand their own power, and they take their Facebook tweet or their Twitter feed or whatever it is and turn it into something more substantive. But once again, when we engage kids and realize it's fundamentally important for us to do this in our system of education, but most importantly, it's social acceptable and, dare I say, cool, Canada's in good hands. Thank you.
I was just thinking, Mark, I feel it would have been a lot easier if that had been cool when I was young.
I think what this stage really needs is a curmudgeon. I think everyone here has made a really great presentation about, that's going to be me. Okay. It's going to have to be me. Because I think everyone here made a really great presentation about different ways of engaging people. And I'm going to start off with a question asking you, Alison. If people are tweeting and they're Facebooking and having these conversations, young people that is, more so than the average age population, why is that not translating into formal political participation? Speculate for me.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would welcome any comments from anybody else. I mean, I think anytime there is a new medium that's created for engagement, it remains to be seen how that translates into other forms. So it's still early. I think, though, I mean, I'll pick up the point Sevaun made about, the multiple paths, and then touch also on a point that Marc made about, how those connects to government, and that isn't always done. So I would say the same with social media. I mean, part of it is because it's new. People are still learning, particularly organizations that have established ways of doing things. But just to even look at members of parliament who would have a lot of flexibility in how they engage online. We did an audit of all their websites, and very few of them even ask for very basic solicitation of perspective from constituents, never mind anything more sophisticated to gather views. Most are really still traditionally using this as a broadcast medium to say, and not even all that well, like a lot of them don't even have their office hours up there yet. So I mean, I don't know why it isn't translating. I would hypothesize that organizations, including governments, that are quick to figure out how they might use that as that pathway in, will probably succeed and thrive much better than those that won't. But my fellow panelists no doubt have views on this too. So, but I'll let you moderate rather than me.
Well,
Sorry, I realize.
I'd like to go to Dave on this question. What do you think is the obstacle there?
The obstacle
between
the jump between the types of engagement that Alison was talking about and then
the formal participation in the political process.
I don't think we should. I mean, I think there's valid reasons not to vote. I have trouble sometimes pulling myself to the polling station. Part of it has to do with the voting system. I mean, there's a reason I spend most of my free time working on voting reform. First past the post not only delivers really unfair results, a great example being the guy who's running our country right now. Most Canadians didn't vote for the Conservatives. So how could he possibly have a majority government? Like, what was the point of having that election, right? We could have just rolled some dice and ended up with just as unfair a result. So when most Canadians vote against the government and they win a majority, I kind of don't blame people for saying, screw that, I'm not voting next time. Like, that wasn't democracy. But the other thing about first past the post is that it drives everyone towards a mushy middle, and it pushes out new voices, like the Greens. The Greens are probably the most appealing party to young people. They get millions of votes and no seats. So again, I think blaming the youth is putting blame in the wrong direction. People are growing up these days in an environment of choice, right? Hundreds of TV stations, hundreds. Maybe there are thousands now, I don't know. I don't have a TV, but when I was a kid, there were like, 20. There were buttons you push, and that was it. There's hundreds of stations. You can watch any movie streaming live anytime. You can listen to any song. And then we're like, oh, it's election time. We've got 3 choices, red, blue, and orange. And they're all kind of sound the same. Vote. I don't blame the kids here. They need more choice. And then they need exciting choice that's vibrant with different colors, and we need to also have less white men in politics. A lot of folks look at City Hall in Ottawa and province, and they're like, oh, that's the thing that white guys do. It's not my thing. Until people see themselves reflected back in that culture, I don't blame them for thinking that it's not something for them. But we have to stand up, say that, and fight against it.
Sevaun, do you think this is anything new? Do you think that now there are more white men in politics? There are more convoluted ideas in politics that makes it difficult for people to engage. Is that true? Or are youth just not participating?
In politics?
Yeah.
So I think part of the process, so let me put it this way. When you travel to a new country and you keep speaking English and everyone around you is speaking a different language, but I'm just going to speak English louder or faster or slower, and maybe you'll get it. There's an element here of we just need to acknowledge that we have to change the language a little bit. I mean, I remember my father, incredible person, and I remember getting one of my first business cards as a professional. And he said, "Oh, honey, that's great. Can you fax that to me?" And this idea that you would have this archaic, traditional sort of way to communicate with people, and I'll just sort of slide a new way of talking to people right on top of that. Fax me your business card so I have your email address, essentially what this was. So why is it that Amazon.ca knows more about me, right? The will you recommend Sevaun? Would you be interested in Hicks? Yeah, I'd be interested in buying those. Those are good suggestions. Why is it that Amazon knows more about me than in many cases my elected official? Because they're speaking in a different language. They're studying me in a different way. They care to know me in a different way. And today's, it resonates because they're trying at least to speak a different language. Being on Facebook doesn't mean you're talking to young people. Having a Facebook page does not mean the same thing. And I think young people are smart enough to know the difference. You ask anybody, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and 6-year-old, they can smell bull stuff very quickly. And that just doesn't go away with age.
Let me ask Marc this question. You have a lot of engaged youth on your hands, and they're very motivated, and they come to the event. 20,000 people fill the stadium. But then you've got all of these youth who are coming up, and they have these political issues, then they confront old, established institutions of democracy, political parties, voting systems. What happens when they get to that level? What happens when they get to that stage?
I think two random thoughts. One isn't to specifically answer your question. They get disillusioned and they try to figure out and they go back to what they know and they go back to Facebook and Twitter and where they live and how they socialize and how they communicate, and that's their default position because that's where they live. And unless we start using and communicating with these young people how they communicate, we're not going to reach them. I mean, there's a reason why we have dozens of people on our social media team because that's where kids live and that's where they communicate, and if we want to make sure that they're engaged, well, we need to go where they are, as opposed to them saying, hey, go where we are because we know best. Point one. Point two, very, very quickly, is I think a lot of this also, with great humility, and I'm speaking as a new parent, also comes down to the role that parents play. And I don't think we can not mention that or diminish this in any way. As an example, when I turned 18, as a rite of passage in my household, my mom took us voting. And so I turned 18, it was the year of a federal election, we went out to dinner, we sat down, we had a conversation, we debated right-left policies and so forth as well. We had the conversation and the whole family came out, and then she literally took me to the voting booth or station. And at the voting booth, I literally took my ballot, and she took a photo of me smiling with my ballot, okay? It's like I was running for office. No, it was just me literally voting for the first time. Then she took it, and she framed it, and she put it on her mantle. Can you imagine me not missing an election? Not because necessarily I really want to vote for the person. My mom would be so disappointed in me. She'd be so disappointed. And I always think back to that photo on the mantle like I can't let my mom down. Small example, but very relevant. If we're going to engage kids, we need to make sure we do this properly, but parents need to lead by example too.
Let me ask you, Sevaun. Why don't we talk a little bit about large issues? I think every generation has had a major issue that everyone kind of knew affected everyone in their family and their relationships. Does this current generation, Gen Y, have that kind of issue?
Have one issue that defines them as a generation? No.
Or even a handful?
I don't think anyone does, to be honest. I don't think anyone does. That's like, again, suggesting that one size fits all. And is there anything more personal than what matters to you? I mean, you think about anybody in the room. What makes you who you are is in part the year you were born, in part the parents that raised you, in part the education you had, in part the job you did or didn't get, in part the boyfriend who scorned you in 5th grade, in part, like, there are so many ingredients that go into making who we are as individuals that, no, there's not one issue that speaks to everybody, but there are some cross-cutting macro trends that have an impact, that go into being at least one ingredient that all of us share. Youth unemployment, to me, right now, in our time, we live in one of the best cities, in the best province, in the best country in the world. Yet our young people, who suffered deeply in the last recession of 2008 and 2009, are not actually getting the jobs back the way adults are in their employment numbers. And in fact, as we study this topic a little bit more, we're learning that not only is it the last recession that hit young people even particularly hard, this has been starting since the year 2000. The gap right now in unemployment is double digit in our province between young people, 15 to 24, and adults. And this has been going on for about 14, 15 years, this development is happening. Is this an issue that is on the radar screens of every young person? Yeah, in some shape, form, or it isn't. Is this going to be an issue that continues to make itself a big macro trend in the have and have not, in the tale of two paychecks? I believe it is. And so one of the things we're doing at Civic Action is trying to get at that, the root causes of youth unemployment. Because why is it that employers in this city tell us, I've got all these jobs that I can't find people to fill them? And young people say, I've got 2 degrees and I'm working at Starbucks. So there's something systematically happening there. And if you ask, is there one issue that might envelop a generation of today? I believe it's that. But I don't believe there's one that is shared by every single one who's born in this era.
I guess here's what I'm trying to get at, is that youth employment shared by a lot of young people, but have they lost a perspective of being a part of a larger public? I'm going to ask you this question, Dave. Has the idea of the public changed over the past, say, 20, 25 years?
It's probably dangerous to generalize too much, but I think one really interesting thing to look at is the Occupy movement, right? Which was very much driven by young people.
Sure.
So on the one hand, they definitely felt like we're part of something because they gathered in the streets, they gathered in parks, and they try to create this space to talk about a very important political and economic issue, the gap between the rich and the poor. But you'll notice they didn't do it at City Hall. They did do it in state legislatures. They didn't do it at Queen's Park. It was almost like there was a lack of awareness, probably more trust, that there is a process out there where you can maybe affect policy. We need to create government in parks because we need to have some system where people can come together and share ideas intelligently to fight for things that are better. So to me, Occupy movement on the one hand is inspiring because it shows the young people not only care but are willing to be involved, but what a depressing message that they didn't feel that there was already a place where you could do that they needed to create something from scratch. So it's yes and no.
Alison, let me ask you this question because you do research on people's perception of the public. What do you think? Is there a shared perspective of what the public is?
Probably not, and there probably never was. But I don't know that specifically. But perhaps to pick up on, I think what the bigger issue is, which is the disconnect, is that there are so many touch points that young people and old people could have with sort of more traditional decision-making processes that don't work for people. A couple of years ago, we did a series of focus groups with people who have chosen not to vote, and I think that's a really important point. Often it is a choice. We sort of assume, it's apathetic, they don't care. They actually have actively decided. The quote that I like the best is, the system doesn't care about me, so why should I care about it? If you've ever tried to go to question period in Parliament, for example, you are basically it's worse than airport security the way that you're treated, and it takes an hour to get in. So the messages that get sent consistently are, don't come, don't participate. Dave has some wonderfully hilarious examples about this at the city level as well. I would bet the reason why people didn't protest in any of the legislative buildings is because there's so much security there. They would have been, arrested or something. And then even people, non-voters, even cite the experience they have simply trying to get redress for a very small thing like helping their kid get in childcare. Things that are actually not the job of the political system all the time. So, if we're going to talk about sort of creating a public, there's just so many different touch points. We talked about online as well that just don't work in a modern society, and fixing those is unfortunately very boring and hard work, but it's going to take a lot more attention from our political leaders than they're giving it today.
Dave, what's the role of media in all of this?
Oh, wow.
Because you've blamed us before.
I have. Where do you start?
Jeez, man. No,
it's really bad. And thank goodness for TVO. It's true. No,
well, thank you.
I'm not just, there isn't, I can sit down with Steve Paikin, and I have for, 20 minutes and have a discussion. Usually it's like, okay, we need a 20-second soundbite, right? So we don't have a lot of in-depth media conversations. But, this whole year with Rob Ford, let me just come out and say this. I don't care if he smokes crack cocaine. I couldn't care less. I never have and I never will. And it's been such a terrible distraction for this city that we've all been carrying. And the media feeds that. And the partisanship at Queen's Park right now that we're seeing and other levels of government, the media really feeds that as well. But let me throw an interesting twist on this, because we've all heard about media concentration and the dumbing down of politics in the media. The one place we can take control of it, because I'm never going to own a newspaper or own a TV station, our public spaces could serve as a counterbalance to messaging, right? It's the one space that we collectively own and we control. And one reason that I put a lot of my volunteer time into looking at how we use our public space in terms of the billboard industry is because, again, like for every private message out there, you know, buy this car, there's another message out there. There's a nonprofit saying, hey, you know, don't drive as much. Try driving a car. Try taking public transit. Those nonprofit groups will never have as much capital to purchase the advertising space. But in public space, we could do that. We could liberate our public spaces to offer that counter message, all the messages we're not hearing from nonprofits and from communities. For example, Dundas Square. It's our town hall, our town square. It's like the heart of our city. And yet we cover it with all these obnoxious corporate ads. They're the same ads we're already seeing on TV, the same ads that are up in Times Square and in London. They have nothing to do with Toronto. They don't reflect who we are. They're not interesting. And let me bring this back to the thing about diversity. Most of the models on those ads, we were talking about this before, they're white, right? Unless you get more than 4 or 5, you've got to put in one that's not white. They're all able-bodied. None of them are wearing a cane, a hearing aid, a wheelchair. None of them are religious in any way. They're all atheists. They're all straight. None of them are too fat. None of them are too skinny. Actually, they're all too skinny, right? Most people look at billboards in our own town square and don't see themselves reflected back. And I don't know if we can reform corporate media. We can change the way we use our public spaces. And Ryerson is right beside Dundas Square. I don't care that it's full of video screens, but why aren't we streaming all the art that the kids at Ryerson and George Brown and Humber are making every day in OCAD in this city and put their stuff up in our town square? Anyways, can I say one more thing that just came up? I might forget it.
Of course.
Our debates, it's criminal that we allow the corporate media to make up rules about our debates and consistently exclude the Green Party, even though they get such a high percentage in the polls. That's pushing away youth. Really makes me angry.
That was a great rant. And the best part of it was kind of, supporting TVO, so thank you. I'm gonna ask this question to Marc. Should we have to make participation cool? You do a great job of doing it, but should we have to?
In an ideal world, we shouldn't have to, but you know what? It certainly doesn't hurt. And what we see is that getting the right celebrities engaged makes a big difference to the kids because they're all following them on Twitter and they're engaged, part of the process. And we have to be careful and selective and lots of disclaimers and so forth as well. But again, the issue for me, and I don't want to keep on belaboring the point, is we have to go, if we're going to engage kids, we have to go where they are as opposed to they thinking that they're going to come to us. So we need to go where they are. So what do the kids care about? They care about their social networks. They care about getting a sense of empathy and community being something more significant than just them. They want to feel part of something larger than themselves. That's really important to them. Celebrity culture, unfortunately, I don't think we should fight against it in so much that we should embrace it to at least get some short-term wins. So in turn, they can make up their own minds. And getting the right celebrities, of course, doesn't hurt. My last slide was that of Degrassi. I mean, the kids love the show. Quintessential Canadian show, international as well, and when they walk out of the We Day stage, it's equivalent to like a Demi Lovato coming out. And for those of you who don't know Demi Lovato, ask your teenage daughters. She's a big deal. And Degrassi significantly is a big deal too. And look at the conversations that these guys have. So long story short, to answer your question somewhat of a convoluted way, is this the ideal route? No, but the situation is as such that we need to get some short-term wins to have some long-term significant implications.
I think Jameson is coming up here because we've got only a few minutes, so this is going to be my last question. It's going to be to Dave. Should we be doing this event at the Drake Hotel for like $6 a ticket while everybody just gets to wear whatever they want? Are we a part of the problem here right now?
I wouldn't say it quite like that because I think this is really important, and I think every kind of event has a role, but it should be free. I mean, I don't think this was intended to necessarily be an interactive dialogue with youth. But absolutely, anytime there's a ticket price to an event, it creates an obstacle, especially for youth. Events should be free, but one more just small concrete thing to throw out there, lowering the voting age to 16 would be such an obvious way to overlap the civics program. When people are, I mean, it's just so obvious, there's such obvious things out there we could do. When people are learning civics in high school, they should be first told, we think you're smart enough to vote. And now let's tell you how the system works. But this is an amazing event. I'm really proud to be a part of it. And I want to thank everyone who organized it on behalf of all of us, even with whatever the ticket price was. They let us in for free, so thank you for that. But this has been amazing.
Well, no, thank you. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't allow for some audience questions, for conversation about participation and youth engagement and the rest, to not have some audience questions. So Ken and I will go to it, but I have one question. Well, first comment, I look forward to the next event at the Drake. I think this is a starting point, and I think it's a great point about ticket price and access, and it's something we need to keep going. We intentionally entitled this "The Public Good," as opposed to political engagement. I guess one of my questions, and to your first question, why do we not see the translation between the engagement on social media to participation? One of my comments would be ease of access. We had Don Tapscott here last month talking about the web has reduced the barriers to start a business, reduced the cost to start a business and the rest, and the same has come for public good. So if the political institutions never change, and youth are familiar with the social media instruments, are we just not going to see them gravitate more towards me-to-we type of institutions to build a public good in a public park as opposed to at seats of parliament? Question. And what are the ramifications of that? I mean, if nothing changes on the one end, it's a hell of a lot easier to start right now on me-to-we than it is to become a candidate in the next federal election. Maybe it's more of a rant than a question. I apologize. I broke my own rule.
Well, Jameson, you're right. We looked across, just to validate, and then we'll turn to questions, but we looked across all the Riding Association websites, 1,307 websites in total. I think, Jane, only, 4 of them, actually, maybe 2 of them? 2 or 4 of them, 5 of them, so a small amount, had information on how to be a candidate. So political parties actually aren't even communicating that, so why should they expect anyone else to? So I think your point is very well taken.
Okay. Hi, my name is Michelle Williams. I actually work at the Royal Bank of Canada, and I have a question about, maybe this is a tricky question, but what role do you think corporations have to play in youth engagement and civic engagement?
I'm happy to take a response on that. So it's interesting because your chief, I think, HR officer sits on our board of directors at Civic Action at RBC. So the civic action model is this. It's that no one sector has a monopoly on great ideas or getting stuff done. And so, Jameson, to your point around, is there going to be some space, and if we don't get people to government or to political service, are we still going to get stuff done? Back in the 70s, really, up to that point, the place you went to have meaningful impact in civic life was government. Maybe in a smaller way, you'd go into like Salvation Army or some of the church-based groups or organizations, but the whole onslaught of nonprofit organizations didn't happen until starting in the 80s in this country in that kind of way. So the civic action model is harness the wisdom of crowds and leverage the diversity of sectors, because you're absolutely right. The private sector vantage point of youth unemployment is fundamentally different than that of the Ministry of Children and Youth Services. So we have a task force right now at Civic Action studying this youth unemployment problem, and it's chaired by leaders in the private sector. In fact, we just had a CEO roundtable last week where we brought in CEOs from different levels of enterprise and size, including small and medium-sized enterprises, to say, what's your take on this problem? Because ultimately, you're the solution, right? Government can only create so many jobs. And I think the way that Civic Action has so interestingly inverted the way of finding solution is part of the solution to these bigger problems as a whole. If you go to where people's space is naturally fitting the finest, you'll pull the best out of them. And if you harness the best of the wisdom of crowds and then find a couple of those nuggets and work with the wisdom of crowds to get them into action, I mean, we're called Civic Action, not Civic Chit-Chat. So we're very much motivated by getting some stuff done. And if the best way to do that is to show up on Bay Street or some of the other areas where people have jobs and say, what does it take to get young people in your offices? Great, let's get that done. Then that's the solution. That's meaningful change.
Can I also talk, one is I think RBC is doing an amazing job, as many companies do, but I do want to say that. But 2 is, can you imagine as a young person in Canada starting your bank account and getting the opportunity to spend, share, and to save? And let's say, for example, specialty share in terms of being philanthropic and engagement, that just crazy idea, but for every up to $100 that you give in terms of that sharing philanthropic engagement, RBC will match that as an example. And all of a sudden, all these young people are starting to realize, I can be a philanthropist. I don't have to wait until I'm 18, 28, 108, whatever the name age is. I can do this right now. I think a lot of young people get this. They understand social media, and they understand because they're marketed to all the time. They, to a certain degree, understand business. And the reality is that business has such a fundamental, as we all know, opportunity to change the world probably more profoundly than any nonprofit or perhaps any government. And if businesses can create the opportunities to leverage this engagement, albeit in hopefully altruistic ways, the significant opportunity is so profound. And especially engaging young people in opportunities where they are interacting with those businesses in ways that will actually help society.
Ken's got a question.
Hi, my name's Amanda, and I worked on a campaign at Queen's, a Get Out the Vote campaign, to try and get our students to vote. And one of the things that we did was we directly looked at role models. So you mentioned your parents took you to vote the first time, and a lot of students aren't experiencing that anymore because they're away at university at a younger age, or at college at a younger age, or just independent at a younger age, and they're not voting with their parents when it's their first opportunity to vote, and they're not creating those habits. One of the things that we did was we tried to get dons to take their floor to vote and sort of fill that in. And I'm wondering, besides or in addition to lowering the voting age, what can be done to create new role models where even now we have a generation of people who they didn't have a role model that taught them how to vote. How can we make up for that?
I'm glad you mentioned the campus issue in general, because another great advantage to lowering the voting age is that you build your first experience voting in high school, not on campus. And when people vote in their first election, not at home, I think it's a problem. I'm not sure if role models is the answer. I love the celebrity stuff. I always try and use celebrities on campaigns I'm working on. But I'm not sure that's the most obvious solution to voter turnout on campus or for youth in general. To me, online voting is such a more obvious solution. Like, why does the Don have to take them anywhere? Like, why aren't we voting on our phones? Like, it's ridiculous. Markham is doing it. They're just up the street. Where's North? Up the street, I think. So, I mean, the idea of going into a booth, maybe that's kind of archaic at this point.
Just to add a couple things to that, I think part of it is what's the definition of a role model. Where you see evidence, the number one reason that people who haven't voted before vote for a first time is because someone they know and trust invites them to do so. Contact with a candidate is also one of the highest reasons. So I do think that kind of work matters. If you look at some of the most interesting stuff that's emerged, particularly out of the Obama campaign, they really used community organizations who have very trusted relationships often. And that was actually where you started to see an uptick. And we run a program called Democracy Talks that's trying to replicate some of that here in Toronto. A couple other points I'll make. One is that there's a huge difference when you look at youth between people who have an education and people who don't. The reason, most of those Queen's students will end up voting statistically, eventually, compared to people who don't have a university education. Doesn't mean that what you're doing is great, but that's where the problem is even harder, and that's what's driving those numbers down even more. So when you're thinking about that stuff, if you ever go on beyond your own community to do it, that's a really important point to make, and that's where the sort of trusted intermediary is even more important because they do not trust politicians. And approaching people with the vote as the first request is not as effective as asking people what they care about, how their voice might be developed, and then coming to the vote later. So there's some interesting sort of sequencing, too, that people are learning that works a little better. So I can chat more with you about that stuff, too, if you want.
Ken, I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Bailey Greenspan. I have a question, I think, for Marc and maybe also Alison. So I was really interested and maybe slightly alarmed by the phrase, vote with your dollar, which is what you said, because I wonder if that means that people are beginning to think of the political process as something that's representative of a corporation or of a private sector. So I wonder what you think about that. And then for Alison, I wonder if that might be a thing, if people might be starting to think about politics in that way, and like, your spending has to be like a corporation's would be, which is sort of maybe the opposite of why government needs to exist. And if that might have anything to do with disengagement.
We talk to young people all the time, and one of the questions that we often get is, I'm only one person, what difference can I make? And I'm only a young person, I'm not allowed to vote. What can I do? How do I get engaged? And just to provide some clarity on my comments, we talk to young people in terms of, you have so much power, you don't realize how much power you have. There's a reason why people are bombarding you with marketing. There's a reason why Facebook wants you so badly. There's a reason why your parents want to make sure that you have a university or college education or whatever that is. You don't understand when you're 12, 13, 14. You think, like so many young people, that the equivalent of that penny. And the reason we wanted kids to collect pennies is, by one, you might not be powerful or you might be powerless, but together you have a huge impact. And so when we talk to young people, they might say, well, I can't vote, I can't make a difference. And the short answer is they can through the civic engagement and, of course, volunteering and raising money, but also how they spend money. Just as an example, the impact that coffee consumption has made on rainforest certification and fair trade has made a bigger impact than any potential voting activity, any potential civic engagement activity, or any potential protest. If we can get people to make sure that they're supporting these women in the communities overseas by having ethical consumption, whether it be chocolates in the child labor industry or coffee in terms of the places in Ecuador and India or wherever else they might come from, that has more of a direct impact because these kids literally can actually create consumption patterns whereby companies will react to them fast, quickly, and significantly. And there's a reason why car companies are marketing kids about hybrids. If you look at hybrid ads, you've got, talked about socially responsible baby boomer millennial. And the second type of hybrid ads on television is to actually teenage daughters to talk to their parents. Seriously, watch this. It's actually fascinating, and there's a reason for that. Car companies have figured out the impact of power that kids have, and I don't know if all the kids have as well, and especially some of our elected officials haven't figured that out too.
Thanks for the question, Bailey. I'll just be super quick and say that there's some strong emerging evidence that treating voters like consumers, which is what a lot of political parties are doing, is not, well, we know statistically it's not causing more people to participate because we know what's been happening. I know we're out of time, so I would just recommend to you Susan Delacourt's book, Shopping for Votes, which is a really thoughtful analysis of this over the last 30 or 40 years that really critiques how political parties have not properly used sort of some of its consumer activities to grow the pie, and much more to focus on narrowing it to their own supporters to the detriment of the public good, to bring us back to the subject.
6:45, well done. So a couple things, couple comments just to conclude. First of all, one of the comments earlier about the media, one of the more depressing moments that I've had in the last little while was watching when Justin Trudeau came out with his policy stance on marijuana consumption and legalization thereof. And one of the media lenses on that was courting the youth vote. To depict the next generation as the number one issue that is pressing on their minds is the legalization of marijuana was a dismissal of a generation in my mind. The second aspect of this is in the last 20 years, the average lifespan has gone up 10. So the average lifespan for male right now is 87 years old, and the average lifespan for a female is 88, otherwise known as the happiest year of their lives. That age is going to go up. So what keeps me up at night isn't the youth unemployment rate. It's the fact that there's a 20-year-old right now whose average lifespan is probably going to be about 93 or 94 years old, and we haven't even started to think about the public policy implications of the fact that those people are going to live for another 73, 74 years. Lastly, I think I checked it the other day, and I think it's correct. Currently at the federal cabinet and at the provincial cabinet, when those doors close, there was no one under the age of 40 participating in the decision of allocating significant amount of public dollars. So my challenge back to this room will be, how do we get in that room? How do people under the age of 40 at least participate in that conversation in some way, shape, or form, whether it's in the political sphere or in the public sphere? With that, a couple things. First of all, I want to thank the panel. If we feel like Canada is in good hands with our youth, the leadership of that youth is in great hands. You guys have been amazing and exceeded any expectation I would have had. So first of all, thank you very much for that.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.